Yeah. Yeah, man.
This happened last year, and I still have the scar on my arm, which makes me remember this every time I look at it. Not a really creepy encounter, but I thought it suited the subreddit. I was in my last year of high school. Well, in my country, you either study during the morning, afternoon, or evening. I went to school in the afternoon, and usually walked home around 5 o'clock. I would take the bus, but the bus was always crowded around that hour. My school was located on the commercial center of my city, so usually after 7 p.m., you wouldn't really see many people around because all the stores were closed up. This resulted in pretty empty streets, with only a few people here and there. Now, on this particular day, I got out of school around 7 p.m. because of a group project, and it was too dark out and it was so deserted, so walking home was not an option. Well, if you keep in mind that I had to cross a bridge to arrive home, my neighborhood was pretty sketchy. I decided I'd take a bus. By that time, the bus was nearly empty. I hopped on and, just like that, made my way to a seat on the back of the bus. Everything was alright. Everything was fine. I'd be home soon. But there was a homeless woman behind me who eventually got up to sit beside me. She had smelled so bad. I try not to mind. I'd usually sit by myself. Homeless people were quiet, and nothing ever happened. So this woman was in a pretty bad situation physically, and was carrying a plastic bag with little stones of crack wrapped around in aluminum foil. I know this because she took them out and put them in her pocket. I, being a really stupid teenager, I try not to think nothing of it. She then started to push me away from her with her body, and also something was brushing my hair. She did this multiple times. Halfway down the road, she would not stop, and I was kind of getting pissed off. But I sat there in silence, and she continued. So, I was seated with my backpack and my laptop in my arms. The inner part of my arm was exposed. And then, she did it. I can't fucking believe it till this day. She scratched my arm. I stood there for about 45 seconds looking at her in shock, with my mouth wide open because I couldn't think of a single thing to say. My arm was bleeding from the cut. It was, I guess you could say it was the size of a regular eyebrow. The scratch of her nail felt like I was cut with a piece of shattered glass. There was another woman on the other side who saw the entire thing happen, but she got up and simply walked away to another seat. There were another 3 people on the bus who also saw it and did nothing, not even asked if I was okay. I got up and sat away from that crackhead woman and waited for my stop. At this point, I was just worried I would get some kind of infection from this. I did nothing. I didn't say a word. I figured I was reacting this way probably because I remembered that she was just a crackhead, and I was in deep shit already, so I felt pity. When I got home, I washed my arm several times, but to this day I still have that scar. Now it's smaller than the original cut, but it's still there. Now this is the part where I say, "Dear crackhead woman, let's not meet," and end. But I fucking met her again at the same bus stop near my school. I was on the bus when we passed her. She was on the street. She was looking wasted as ever. Back when I was in 11th grade, about 12 years ago, I was a bit of a troubled teen. After growing out of that awkward stage, I suppose the new attention from boys often clouded my judgment. One day at school, A classmate told me that he had a friend who had seen me in the school bus and thought I was cute. So we got my number to give to the guy. This would be a mistake. That afternoon, the classmate calls and puts his friend on the phone. The guy says his name is Slim. Well, Slim is friendly, but something seems odd about him. Well, I couldn't put my finger on it at the time though. He didn't talk like me or my friends, but he was from California, so I thought maybe that was why. Well, I asked how old he was, and he said he was 18. Me being 16, I didn't have a problem with it. I told him I was 16, and he started talking. I suppose his conscience was getting to him, because within a couple of weeks he admitted that he was actually older. He said he was really 21, which still wasn't a big deal. I thought it was cool to date guys a few years older than me. I noticed that sometimes he'd get really annoying and say off-the-wall things such as how the trees talk to him when he sits outside. The classmate that introduced us smoked a lot of weed, so I figured Slim was just as high as he was saying that. I found out later that he was high on crack. At times he would begin saying sexual things to me, and I would get uncomfortable and ask him to stop. Most of the time he did, but when he didn't, I'd hang up on him. He'd call back and apologize. Most of the time he just talked about us maybe getting together and getting married and having kids one day. At that point, I should have just stopped talking to him. But I've always hated hurting people's feelings, so I'm too nice at times. Thinking I could just distract him, I gave him a friend's phone number, hoping he'd take a liking to her and forget about me. He began calling her as well, but wasn't saying the sexual things to her like he did me. At the time, he was more of an annoyance than anything I felt I needed to worry about. But that would soon change. I think he got tired of the 21-year-old charade and began getting sloppy with what he said. Now at one point, he said to me that he played baseball in high school against Mark McGuire. My blood ran cold as I realized that Mark McGuire was around 40 years old. He said, "Do you know what that means?" I said, "You're not 21, are you?" Now he admitted that he was in fact 38 years old. Literally the same age as my dad. I felt so sick thinking about all the sexual things he said to me. I didn't know what to say, so I just played it off, not knowing what else to do and not wanting to get my parents involved. But one Saturday evening, he called and I said I was on my way out the door and I couldn't talk. He knew that I went to the skating rink with my friend on the weekends, and he told me that he was going too, so he could finally meet me. I got upset and I told him not to come up there, and that I didn't want to see him. I got off my phone and my friend drove us to the skating rink. I had a great time and forgot about Slim until I got home, and the phone rang. As soon as I answered, I heard his voice. I began to feel sick. He asked if I had fun and I said yes. He told me that he had been there. I didn't recall seeing anyone unfamiliar, and so I called his bluff and told him he was lying. He then told me what vehicle my friend drove and what I had been wearing exactly. He said in such an amused voice, "I was sitting in my car, a parking lot. You walked right past my car, but you had your head down so you didn't see me. You looked so good and I almost got out of my car to talk to you, but there was a lot of people around. You have nice breasts and ass. You know, I could please you if you'd give me the chance." I felt more violated than I ever had before, and I went off on him and hung up. He called back about 10 times in a row, but I ignored it. The calls eventually tapered off and he became just a memory, for a few years anyway. When I was 19, I worked at a grocery store in the office. The phone rang one day and I heard a familiar voice on the other end. It was Slim. He told me that he had been in the store and saw me, but was unable to talk to me because my boss was in the office with me. He told me that he was going to have a friend bring him up there soon to see me, and that I would know him because he was bald and his friends all told him he looked like Charles Barkley, and that he had a chipped tooth. I told him to never come to my job, and there wasn't a single part of me that wanted to see him, ever. He said okay, and got off the phone, but I had a feeling I'd have a closer encounter soon. Around 2 p.m. it had gotten pretty slow, and I was hanging out in the office. All of a sudden, this bald guy comes to the window and greets me. The voice made my blood run cold. I look up and see Charles Barkley. Well, if he'd been an addict for the last 20 years, the chipped tooth was actually just gone. The sight of him made me want to throw up. I was extremely pissed off at this point and told him to get out of the store and never come back and never to speak to me again. He looked disappointed, but apologized and left. I told the manager, and he said that if Slim came back in the store ever again to tell him, and he'd have him arrested. I had to be escorted to my car by a male co-worker for weeks after that. That was luckily the last time I heard of him, and the only time we came face to face. I believe he moved back to California now. So Slim, you filthy crackhead motherfucker, let's not meet again. So this happened this past winter one weekend night in a house I was living in with my fiance. I should mention that this house wasn't in the greatest of areas in Delaware, and kinda sketchy at night, but it didn't seem all too horrible since the neighbors seemed to have kids and pets. It was just a temporary living situation before we could find our own house to rent. Well, anyway, my fiance decided to go out that night and have a couple of drinks with his friends. But this particular night, I was just not feeling like going out and being up late. I was particularly tired from school and just wanted to cuddle with our doggy on that cold night. The evening was going fine like any other casual night, and I ended up falling asleep. The next time I woke up, it was really late and I woke up very suddenly. I noticed my fiance wasn't home yet, and this sort of made me worry. And also a bit annoyed because he said he would come home a little early so we could hang out before bed. When he finally got home, we got in a mini argument as I was staring out of our bedroom window. Another detail to note, our bed was up against the wall right next to the window, and that was ground level and it looked out to the front lawn and street. So, as I'm whining about him coming home late while simultaneously staring out at the faded yellow street lamp, I noticed this dark figure walking down the street, and at a rather fast pace too. This immediately piqued my interest, and I kept watching from the safety of my room. Well, keep in mind, it was a pitch black winter night, and if it weren't for that street lamp, I wouldn't have noticed a thing. As well, our room light was on, and so from outside it was very obvious people were inside and we were clearly visible, were anyone to look in. So it turns out that this guy that is racing down the street, not running, but walking as fast as you could possibly muster in a walk, he's directly in front of our house now, and for some odd reason he automatically stops dead in his tracks right in front of our window, as if he hit a brick wall. He's about 20 feet from the window, but close enough for me to see in clear view what he looked like. He was wearing a t-shirt, dark jeans, with thinning hair, almost bald, and looked of an Italian or Mediterranean descent, probably late 30s or 40s. I remember so distinctly the next thing he did. So after he stops in his tracks, he turns his head and looks at me. He turns his head and looks me straight in the eyes. And never did I feel so vulnerable and out in the open than I did that moment. It gave me the absolute chills, and I had the worst vibes just from one look. My heart just dropped. It was the coldest glare I've ever seen. It didn't help that I was only wearing a thin lingerie type shirt and no pants whatsoever, only underwear. The look was one of pure intrigue all of a sudden, like this mad rampage was all in a halt for a second, and he wasn't expecting to see me sitting there with a frown on my face. After that too long look, he just picked up his speed again and continued his fast walk pace down the street. I immediately stopped giving my fiancé shit about coming home late and said, "Babe, did you see that? I did not like that one bit. Nope, nope, nope. That was super weird." My fiancé did not see the guy because he was on the other side of the room changing out of clothes and getting ready for bed, whilst I was chewing his ass for being late. He was just confused and agreed that yes, it was weird. But the guy walked away, so there was not much we could do really. Anyway, about 10 minutes pass, and we've calmed down, and we're just laying in bed chatting. Yet in the back of my mind, I can't seem to shake the creepy eye contact we had back there. He definitely looked like a seedy guy, up to nothing good. All of a sudden, our dog started growling loudly and staring out of the window at something. He never barks or growls at anything ever, unless it's a person that comes to visit that he doesn't recognize. He has an extremely calm temperament, as that's what his breed is known to be like. Well, anyway, out of the corner of my eye, I suddenly sense movement and see this black dark silhouette just inches away from my window and my face, slowly creeping out from behind our bush shrubbery and reaching for the window. All of a sudden, I just lost my shit and started screaming my fiance's name and pointing, it's him, that's the guy!" and leaping out of the bed. This guy was 2 seconds away from prying the window open. Luckily, it was locked, and we could tell that there was some kind of object in his hand. My fiancé leaped at the window in rage and banged violently on it, roaring, "Hey, what the fuck are you doing?" This was enough to scare the guy, so he proceeds to grin and run away down the street the direction he came in. Now my fiancé chased after him, but he was way too far gone already. Fucker was fast. Now our roommate, his girlfriend, and a friend were at home at the time thankfully, and they happened to be outside smoking and drinking on the porch. They came running inside asking what the hell was going on. I was wrapped in my blanket shivering, scared as hell, crying, and I could see that my fiancé was a bit nervous too. So we decided that we would all go upstairs to the bedroom and lock the door. Now the creepy part is, my roommate said that he actually noticed him for hours as he was walking up and down the street like that for a while and would see them but never really said anything. They thought it was weird, but they didn't really do too much about it. Now what's scary to think is that he may have noticed me sleeping before through my window, for all that time that he was pacing back and forth in front of our house and down the street. Well, who knows? Needless to say, I was rattled and nervous at what this man was up to, as I sincerely know his intentions were no fucking good. I could feel his nasty vibes from so far away. I have a feeling he was on some kind of drug or speed. He looked most certainly cracked up on something. After that, we put a really creepy clown picture in our window, and so if he were to ever return, he would come face to face with something just as creepy as him, and to send a message not to fuck with us. So creepy and cracked out peeping Tom, let us never, never meet again.